Welcome and thanks for joining us. My guest today is Jim Carlini, the Chief Technology Officer of Leidos. Mr. Carlini, good to have you with us.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
And this idea of great power competition is really coming into so many government agencies, so many government policies, in reflection of the way the world has changed in the past number of years, with China rising. For purposes of helping the government with its technology strategy to take on this whole idea of great power competition, might be a good way to begin by having you define what it is exactly. What is it your customers are telling you that they mean by great power competition? And we can concentrate on also whether this is simply a Defense Department concern, or, as I suspect, maybe it's wider than that.
Well, thanks, Tom. That's a great place to start. I'd start by saying I don't think there's an agreed upon definition of what great power competition is. In fact, nowadays I think people are arguing over whether that's the right expression to really capture our geopolitical situation. So I think the current administration, for instance, likes strategic competition versus great power competition. But by whatever name you prefer, it's a label really for a new era of geopolitical jockeying for influence and control of global affairs by great powers. So US, China, and Russia, generally what folks mean when they say great power competition. It's got some attributes that are really important. It's a far-reaching competition that really touches on all levers of power, and it's very global in nature. So there really isn't a corner of the Earth, or frankly in orbit, that is untouched by great power competition. So from deep space to the Arctic, the competition's being played out. And I'd also say that it's high stakes, right? So at stake really is, frankly, what the global order will look like in the coming decades and who's going to drive it. Security architectures, international norms, what are they going to look like? All that's in play. And will it be what we've enjoyed for many decades, sort of a Western democratic capitalistic order, or something very different, something dominated by a few, one, two authoritarian states? So it's a high stakes game, and it's also a very far reaching competition.
So then it would involve many organs of the government, not just the Defense Department, but I imagine State Department is actively there, and Commerce and Treasury, really all of them.
Exactly. And because what needs to be done is leveraging all levers of power, it really cuts across things like diplomacy, economic, military, information, intelligence, law enforcement, et cetera. All of those levers of power get touched. So it touches the entire government, from defense, intel, commerce, DHS, Treasury. It's also, I should say, not just all parts of the government, but I think it hits home as well. It's not, in the last 20 years, we've gotten used to some of the fights we've had overseas. The fight was always over there, or the competition was over there. It's something that hits home. It's really hits every one of us individually. The economic competition touches all of us. As we win economically, or as we prosper economically, we all individually prosper. But when we look at the information domain and cyber domains, which have global reach, and to the extent the competition plays out in those domains, it touches every one of us. It hits home. So whether it be large cyber breaches or influence efforts on social media, all of those things hit home for us. So I think we all have a role. Our government obviously has a crucial role, and parts of the government are moving out on this. But we have one individually, and I'd say finally that we in industry have a privileged position to really help our government customers grapple with some of the challenges.
And we'll get into those in some detail, but I just wanted to point out something you said that's really crucial in this, and that is the economic competition. In the old Cold War, where the Soviet Union was the principal adversary, you might say, the economic interdependence of the countries was not very far extant at all. They weren't a big trading partner. China is a savvy economic power that sells and buys, and we from them and them from us. And that does change the quality of how we pursue this, doesn't it?
It really does. And, it's one of many big differences, I think, from the Cold War era. So as you pointed out, our economies are intertwined, certainly with China to a great extent. But also another difference from the Cold War era is China is truly an economic powerhouse, second only to us. Russia is around sixth in the world, but China really is an economic powerhouse. So that complicates economic maneuvers in great power competition. We're also today versus the Cold War dealing with both China and Russia. So that's certainly a difference that complicates matters as well, both of which have significant strengths. Some other differences I can point out too is that tech savviness, right? China is particularly savvy when it comes to technology. They're making strategic technology bets, things like artificial intelligence, and they're making a lot of progress in establishing competency in these areas and beyond. And to boot, they also have significant manufacturing capacity. So another difference from the Cold War era. There's a whole list of other differences as well that I could point out, but let me just hit a couple others, just because I think they're important for talking about how we respond to all this. The underlying global technology environment today, if we think back to the Cold War, it's so very different, right? We don't dominate many of the technology realms that we did back in the 70s, 80s. Today, technology development is global. It's driven by the commercial marketplace. It's changing very rapidly, so we have to deal with that reality as well. And the last couple of things I'll point out is that we live in a world that is incredibly interconnected as opposed to the Cold War era. The reach and capacity of our global information fabric it's remarkable, and it's growing with things like 5G coming online. So all countries, people, things are pretty much within reach from almost anywhere. And that has brought in what we might call the age of cyber, that when I started my career back at the end of the Cold War, we were not talking about cyber the way we talk about it today. In fact, some terms like cybersecurity came about in the 80s at the end of the Cold War. Today, it's a very different story, where cyber is part of it's a critical domain, both in peace and in wartime. So lots of differences, I think, that complicate our challenges in great power competition between where we're going in the 2020s and beyond and what the Cold War was like.
So as a broad-based supplier to both the civilian and defense sides of government, what is the essential AI requirement? What is it they seek from the commercial sector with respect to AI?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of dimensions of artificial intelligence that we can touch on here for great power competition. So I'll start by saying, totally agree that the commercial world is driving a lot of the core development in artificial intelligence. But in many cases, for application for government purposes, one of the things that some of our customers are particularly concerned about and really emphasize, and there is development within the government in this regard, and it's been important for us as well, is what we might call trust and resilience. Or before AI is adopted by many of our customers, they need to be assured that it will work as it's advertised. It needs to be resilient, whether it's to an adversarial attack or whether it's simply, is it unbiased? Will it perform as advertised? There's a whole array of concerns they have under, you might say, the banner of trust. Before I let it go out in the wild, I need to be sure it's trusted. So for us, and I think for some of our other colleagues in industry, part of what we need to do on top of some of the great technology that's coming out of the commercial world is help our customers, both technologically and in the way they employ it, to gain that trust and to gain that willingness to put it out in the wild, if you will, to serve some of their mission purposes, which really range from war fighting to simply gaining a lot of efficiencies that are very important for just reducing expenditures and allocating some of that money toward mission and toward the great power competition.
So in many ways, then it updates the role of systems integrator from what it was earlier. And I think of Leidos in some sense as an integrator for some of the big famous projects that you're working on with the federal government. So maybe comment on technology integration as a service that can help in the great power competition.
I think it does, and I think that the general theme that that's important in this is to be able to be agnostic in doing integration across the vast enterprise, which is part of what Leidos brings because of the scale that we bring. But the general theme that we bring to those large scale integrations is resilience and security, and this flows directly from the great power competition, right? Because every domain is contested in a great power competition, whether it be for defense applications, but also for civil and health applications. We need to protect healthcare data. We need to protect the infrastructure for our healthcare systems and hospitals. We need to protect the critical infrastructure for the nation. So security is a major theme that we as a system integrator bring to our customers, and it's absolutely critical that we do that, and we bake that into everything we do. And in fact, here at Leidos, we talk about something we call Leidos Secure, which is our effort to make sure, from information systems to physical platforms to complex integration jobs, that we're baking in that security in everything we do. Go ahead.
I was going to say that's one of the great challenges for contractors then, is deploying potent technologies, but in a way that conform to US values and constitutional and legal limits. And that's not a constraint necessarily on some of the other countries.
That's exactly right. And AI is a great example of that, right? Where I talked about trusted AI. One of the things that we make sure that we do when we introduce AI for our customers is we build in the explainability and the ability for them to understand what it's doing and why, and to understand it's not biased, that they can trust it. But very importantly, we come with a decades-long ability to introduce it into the field, a methodology by which they can play with it, they can dial up and down capabilities, they can come to trust that it's going to do what they want it to do and not do things that they don't want it to do. So a very important part of what we do when it comes to AI and in all of our applications is to build in that trust and resiliency and security across the board.
And those are requirements, I imagine, that are built into the activities, the contracting and acquisition activities that you're seeing in those activities that are related to the competition.
I'd say sometimes they are. Sometimes I think in some of our customers are just beginning to get to the point where, again, back to our great power competition context, they're just beginning to grapple with some of these implications of great power competition. So this baking in of resiliency is not always front and center, but I think more and more over time, we're going to see that be front and center because again, the global interconnectedness that we have touches everything. So all of our customers are going to be doing this more and more, worried about resilience.
Yeah. So in a sense, you can lead them that way as a contractor, gently, but also maybe help them steer toward where they need to be, that and they know, but maybe the language isn't quite there.
That's exactly right. And what we talk about internally here is strategic anticipation, right? So we have constructed ourselves and our technology strategy to, if you will, play for the 2020s. We're looking out to the 2020s and saying, okay, what are our customers going to need? How do we anticipate that? What are the attributes that we see that we need to bring to them? So when in some cases, customers are at a different point in the spectrum when it comes to responding to great power competition. We want to be there ahead of them and help them to have the tools available to them. And this gets back to my privileged position, right? That's our job as an industry, is to have those tools available to them, to be an industry partner that can be there when they need it and to deliver what they need rapidly.
All right, we've got a lot more ground to cover, but we're going to take a break right here. My guest today is Jim Carlini, the Chief Technology Officer of Leidos. I'm your moderator, Tom Temin. This discussion is the technology challenge of great power competition, sponsored by Leidos here on Federal News Network.